Hey there, ready to get really chilly?
Oh, yeah.
Today's deep dive takes us to the extremes of human endurance.
Literal?
Literally, with Alfred Lansing's Endurance.
Yeah.
This isn't just some, icy adventure story. We're unpacking how 28 men, led by the, let's be honest,
Right.
slightly crazy Ernest Shackleton,
Yeah.
survive being trapped in Antarctica for over a year.
And it's incredible because by the time Shackleton sets off, the South Pole's already been conquered. So what drives a man to push further into this desolate landscape? That's part of what Lansing unravels so well.
Okay, so we've got Shackleton driven across this entire continent, and he's assembled this crew.
Right.
What kind of ship are they entrusting their lives to in this, shall we say, ambitious endeavor?
Yeah, they set sail on the Endurance, a Norwegian-built ship specifically designed for polar conditions. Now, while sturdy and built to withstand the pressure of the ice, remember this is the early 1900s.
Right.
Their fate rests on a vessel that's impressive for its time,
Right.
but almost unimaginable compared to modern icebreakers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're sailing into this vast, unforgiving expanse, the Weddell Sea.
Right.
I can't even imagine what that first encounter with the Antarctic pack ice must have been like.
Lansing paints a picture of awe-inspiring beauty, but also immense power. Imagine these massive ice floes, constantly shifting, groaning, colliding. Initially, the crew is excited, navigating this labyrinth of ice, but that excitement soon turns into a struggle for survival.
It's like being stuck in a slowly tightening grip, isn't it?
Totally.
You mentioned the pressure of the ice. That brings us to the Endurance's ultimate fate, being trapped.
Imagine this. You're on the ship, and the ice starts closing in.
Oh, God.
It's not a sudden catastrophic event, but this slow, agonizing squeeze. Lansing uses Worsley's log entries to bring this to life.
Oh, wow.
Worsley was Shackleton's captain, and his words capture the growing pressure, both literally on the ship and on their hopes of escape.
I bet you can practically hear the ship groaning under the strain. It's like the Endurance itself becomes a character of this story.
Absolutely. The ship was their lifeline, and as the ice tightened its grip, the sounds of the ship groaning and buckling, it became this constant reminder of their predicament.
I'd be terrified.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of fear, how did the crew cope with this slow-motion disaster? It wasn't like a shipwreck where you're thrust into immediate survival mode.
Right.
This was weeks and weeks of waiting, knowing their situation was growing more dire by the day.
This is where Lansing's account truly shines. He reveals these everyday acts of resilience. They weren't just passively waiting for rescue. They salvaged supplies from the icebound ship. They created these routines to maintain morale, even putting on plays and musical performances.
Plays?
Yeah.
Seriously. Talk about keeping your spirits up in the face of, almost certain doom.
Exactly. And Lansing doesn't shy away from the darker side of it either. He talks about dwindling food supplies, the ever-present threat of frostbite, and the psychological toll of the relentless cold and darkness.
So they're in this fight not just against the elements, but against despair itself.
Which brings us to the inevitable and, honestly, heartbreaking moment. The Endurance is crushed. Lansing doesn't hold back on the details, describing how the ice slowly contorts and swallows the ship.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the feeling of hopelessness, the finality of it.
It would be easy to give up, but not with Shackleton at the helm. This is where his leadership becomes legendary. In a move Lansing highlights, Shackleton throws away valuable possessions, gold coins, even a gold cigarette case, to show survival was the only priority now.
Wow. Talk about a powerful message. It's like he was saying, forget material things. Our lives are the only treasure that matters now. What a way to rally a devastated crew.
It was a turning point. They were no longer fighting to save their ship, they were fighting to save themselves. But they were still stranded on a shrinking island of ice, hundreds of miles from land with limited supplies. This is where their ordeal really begins.
So what happens next? They can't exactly set up camp on a disintegrating ice floe?
They're adrift for months, camping on ice floes that threaten to break apart at any moment. Lansing doesn't gloss over the brutality of this stage, the constant threat of storms, the dwindling food, the psychological strain of their situation.
It's incredible that they didn't succumb to despair. I mean, how do you even begin to process that level of uncertainty?
You see glimpses of it in their diaries, which Lansing weaves into the narrative. But what's remarkable is how they band together, they support each other, they find ways to laugh, to keep their spirits up. They had to, really, because their ordeal was far from over.
This is where their journey to Elephant Island comes in, right?
Yes. After months adrift, Shackleton makes a daring decision to reach open water and attempt to sail to land in their lifeboats. Imagine the scene, these tiny open boats tossed about in the vast Southern Ocean, surrounded by ice floes and threatened by storm.
It's hard to grasp the scale of what they were up against.
Ugh.
The Southern Ocean is notorious for its ferocity.
Exactly, and Lansing doesn't let you forget it. He describes hurricane-force winds, waves the size of small mountains, and the constant bone-chilling cold. The journey pushes them to their absolute limit physically and mentally.
It's a miracle any of them survived that.
Their survival is a testament to Shackleton's navigation skills and their sheer determination.
Right.
Remember, they're not just passively riding the waves, they're battling them, constantly bailing water, fighting to maintain their course.
And then after what must felt like an eternity, they spot land, Elephant Island.
Imagine the relief, the exhaustion, the sheer joy of setting foot on solid ground again, even if it is this desolate, windswept island that offers little protection from the elements. But their ordeal wasn't over. Not even close.
Because Elephant Island was far from a safe haven, right?
Exactly. It was uncharted, desolate, and battered by ferocious storms. They were still hundreds of miles from civilization with no way to contact the outside world. They knew their only hope was for Shackleton to attempt another impossible journey.
This is where the James Caird comes in, that tiny lifeboat that Shackleton chooses for the 800-mile voyage to South Georgia Island. Talk about a long shot.
It was a suicide mission in the eyes of many. Lansing describes the James Caird as a 22-foot cockle shell, barely big enough to hold 6 men, let alone withstand the fury of the Southern Ocean.
And yet Shackleton assembles a crew, Worsley Crean McNeish, Vincent McCarthy willing to take that gamble with him. What compelled those men to volunteer for a journey that could easily be their last?
I think it speaks to the level of trust they placed in Shackleton. He had this uncanny ability to inspire loyalty and belief. Even in the face of impossible odds, he was asking them to do the unthinkable, but he's also right there with them, facing the same dangers, the same uncertainties.
It's that shared struggle, that unwavering belief in their leader that shines through in Lansing's account, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Lansing doesn't just tell you about their courage. He puts you right there in that tiny boat with them. He uses their diaries to convey the physical and mental toll of the journey. The relentless cold, the waves crashing over the deck, the constant fear of capsizing. They were sailing into the teeth of the storm literally with only a sextant and the stars to guide them.
It's hard to even fathom how terrifying that must have been.
One detail that sticks with me is Lansing's description of their clothes, freezing solid. Imagine being so cold that even the slightest movement is agony. That sleep is impossible because you're constantly battling hypothermia.
It's a level of endurance that's hard to even comprehend.
And through it all, there were moments of humor, of camaraderie, of sheer grit that kept them going. They sang songs, they told stories. They reminded themselves that giving up wasn't an option. They had to survive, not just for themselves, but for the men they left behind on Elephant Island.
It makes you realize the power of hope, doesn't it? The belief that even in the darkest of moments, there's still a chance, however slim, that things can turn around.
And hope was all they had when they finally reached the shores of South Georgia Island. But even that was a near disaster.
Wait, what do you mean? They survived that epic ocean voyage? What more could go wrong?
They landed on the wrong side of the island. Picture this. They're battered, starved, half-frozen, and staring up at sheer cliffs and a treacherous, uncharted mountain range that stood between them and the whaling station on the other side.
You've got to be kidding. After everything they'd already endured, they had to basically scale a mountain range.
It was their only option. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean volunteered for this next leg of the journey. They knew that staying put meant certain death for everyone. So these 3 men already pushed to the brink, set off on foot across this unforgiving terrain.
I can't even imagine the physical and mental fortitude that took. It's like something out of a movie.
Oh, Lansing doesn't hold back on the details. He describes them battling exhaustion, hunger, hallucinations, even as they navigated glaciers, crevasses, and icy slopes. There's one point where they're descending a steep ice-covered slope in the dark and almost walk straight into a massive chasm, a bergschrund.
That's terrifying. They were so close to safety, yet still death lurked around every corner.
They barely managed to scramble back up to safety. Can you imagine the despair, the feeling that fate itself was against them? Yet they persevered. And after 36 hours of nonstop struggle, they stumbled into the whaling station. Clothes in tatters, faces, gaunt eyes, wild with exhaustion.
Gives me chills just thinking about it. They went through so much to get help. But what about the men back on Elephant Island? How did they hold on knowing that rescue was still so uncertain?
Frank Wild Shackleton's second-in-command stayed behind to lead the remaining crew. He was tasked with keeping their spirits up. Not an easy feat when you're stranded on a desolate island with dwindling supplies and no guarantee of rescue. Lansing recounts their agonizing wait, the dashed hopes with each passing ship that failed to reach them due to the ice.
It's heartbreaking knowing their rescuers were out there but blocked by the very forces they had barely escaped. It really highlights the mental resilience of these men.
Absolutely, and their faith in Shackleton. Remember, they had no way of knowing if he even survived that boat journey, let alone managed to reach help. Yet they clung to that hope. And finally, after months of agonizing wait and 3 failed rescue attempts, a Chilean tugboat, the Yelcho broke through the ice and reached Elephant Island.
That must have been an emotional reunion. Everyone's safe and accounted for.
Lansing paints a vivid picture of that moment, the men on Elephant Island spotting the ship, rushing to signal it, the overwhelming relief when they realized it was really happening. After everything, all 28 men who set out on that expedition returned home alive.
Wow. Talk about a testament to human endurance and to leadership. Shackleton's determination to bring every single one of his men back. It's awe-inspiring.
It is, and that's what Lansing captures so brilliantly in Endurance, the raw courage, the camaraderie, the sheer will to live that enabled these men to survive against impossible odds.
This deep dive barely scratches the surface. If you want a story that will stay with you long after you finish the last page, I urge you to check out Endurance by Alfred Lansing. You can find an affiliate link in the show notes, and trust me, you won't regret it. Until next time, keep exploring.